One thing I did with my Chinese was to read the Chinese classic, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's about the period at the end of the Han Dynasty. The Han was the first great dynasty of China that started about 200 BC and ended around 200 AD. So this takes place around 200 AD. And everything is starting to fall apart. And so all these institutions that used to be so solid have become corrupted. One of the recurring themes is like, what's the proper way to behave during a 乱时期, which is to say, kind of a time of chaos. And in a time of chaos, it seemed to me that it's like the ones who decided to go up into the mountains and just avoid keep far away from the courts, that they did better. And I guess I kind of reached a similar conclusion in a different time where, let's say, public institutions and universities were strong and healthy and were really contributing to society in important ways. I think it makes more sense to become a part of those institutions and contribute and through them contribute to building up society. And maybe in other countries, I get the sense it's not any like Russia's anywhere close to being utopian, but their public institutions are increasingly, and I think in China too, are staffed by people who really do want to, who are devoted to the common good, and in those places. Well, one thing you can see in both China and Russia, and I think it's probably also true in Iran, that I know less about Iran, is that you get very, very bright people rising to the top. And I think that is a sign of healthy institutions too, that they are selecting people who are very capable. And we're just not seeing that in the U.S. Look at the people that are rising to the top. It's not just you get smart people in academic institutions, but you get these administrators too are very, very corrupt. Anyway, maybe I need to think more about that, but this is kind of my general impression. I can't prove that's true, but I get that sense.
It makes sense. I think it resonates with me at least. So if in Russia, China, Iran, these institutions seem to be a little bit healthier and they're being filled with people that actually are aiming at the what's best for the country, the common good. But you're saying here in the United States, it's not the case anymore. Instead, it has been overtaken by some type of political agenda, maybe what we call wokeism or something else, or globalism.
Both of those things, I would say. Both of those things. And so, it's equally true of Harvard University and
University of Tennessee.
And the University of Tennessee, that's right. I mean, it's amazing, the degree of conformity. It's really hard to break out from that. But that's, it's just part of, that's part of the big problem that we have, again, in this country, as we look at, we've talked about that before, is this growing gap between the establishment and the people, and also really, I think, a growing gap between the establishment worldview and reality. It is a product of education. All these people that end up leading the, elite institutions, who we're talking about, whether it's media or academia or the judiciary, they've all gone through, they've gone through these universities, and they've been taught, but even more importantly, they just, adopted the mindset. They understand that that's part of being the elite, is that you have certain views. And I felt those pressures, and I just decided to walk away from them because I felt like I was going to make compromises, unhealthy compromises, let's just say. But a lot of people, they end up, they don't really think very hard about it, I think, or they decide that they don't recognize their own weakness in the end when they come out of, they graduated and they rise to, whether it's law firms or, media organizations or whatever, they've adopted this worldview, and it includes the wokeism, but also the globalism and the Western hegemony. It's all part of the same thing. So that, it's a very serious problem.
you think that the more education you receive, or let's say the higher education you receive once you get to graduate, postgraduate programs, that you're actually becoming less able to think critically because you have to conform? And then that's why we see so many very intelligent people, the elite class, that seem to not be able to confront the realities of things like what's happening in the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
Because they just read the New York Times and there's these appeals to titles and authorities, and you've gone through the system
Yeah.
that even though you maybe 10th grade you would have said like this doesn't make sense, but now postgraduate you is like, no, I understand things better now, but you really don't. You don't
Right. Right.
don't question
Yeah,
things.
no, I think that's true. And that's what I saw. I felt this pressure. If I wanted to look smart, I was supposed to adopt certain views, about all manner of subjects. And I knew what the smart views were, but I didn't believe in them. And then I didn't really know exactly what my own views were. I was kind of groping for them. So when I tried to express my own views, I generally made a fool of myself. And, and then you feel like, oh gosh, now the worst thing to do within academia is to appear dumb. So it's just really easy to say, I'm just going to adopt smart views. It's a shortcut to being smart. And I be honest, I think that's what everybody does. And maybe a few of them will admit that to you. I think most of them can't even see it. They did it a long, long time ago, took that path.
So do these institutions just eventually have to fail because they're getting to the point where they're contrary to reality now, right? In many of their views.
Yeah.
So
right.
then,
I guess I would say that probably, it's similar whether, and I'm not saying that there isn't like corruption in China or Russia, or Iran. I'm sure there's plenty. That's sort of a separate issue, plain old corruption. There may be less corruption in the West, but what we've talked about is, we have this new form. It's this institutionalized corruption. And I imagine too, I don't really know. Yes. But if you're rising up through these elite institutions, there would be pressures to conform to a certain worldview within Russia or whatever. But maybe the thing is that worldview is sounder. It's based on reality, and it actually, is helpful for the nation. I think the problem in the U.S. is that you do have, there is an elite. Not all elites are bad. There can be elites that are really devoted to their country, and they can, and into their own people to a great extent. But that's not the kind of elites that we have. They've adopted views that are, I think, frankly, self-destructive and divorced from reality. And that's the problem.
so what's the way out?
Yeah, well, you say evolution or revolution, could there be changes slowly affected? One thing that it was at Gramsci, he posited the long march through the institutions. That turned out to be prophetic. That he's talking about the left. The left needs to make a long march through the institutions, through the universities and other institutions, and eventually transform these institutions. This was an idea that he put forward that, in contradistinction to, revolutionary Marxism. Okay, we don't have a violent revolution and overthrow the establishment. We become the establishment. And you say, well, the Gramsci approach is what worked. And I think probably Gramsci and a lot of these people, they looked and saw that the kind of so-called leftists that have taken over, they would have been horrified. They said, oh, that's not what we're all about, because they have transformed these institutions, but they themselves have become transformed in the process. But anyway, I bring this up because one possibility I know that certain dissidents have put forward is that we need to have the dissidents have to have their own long march through the institutions. That's possible. I just think that, maybe at some point that can happen. That right now the establishment is just not going to tolerate that. I think a big part, maybe the main part of the reason that Gramsci's approach worked is that the old establishment was very, very soft and very tolerant and really didn't fight back. I mean, in the end, there really wasn't much of a culture war within these institutions. They kind of just gave up and the new guys took over. And I don't think that that's going to happen now. The new guys are more are less tolerant of opposition. That's my impression. That may change someday, but I think that's the way it is now. So that's not going to work. And so the other thing is to build up your own institutions, but it's hard to do, when the establishment has so much control over funding and everything else. Now, what Trump and this new administration, like for the first time, I think we're seeing some dissident ideas have made it into the administration. And, you see it through, again, people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and others that are real dissidents. It just, and then Trump himself sometimes, this is what he's so hated and has caused so much derangement on the establishment side, is that he does say things that are truly, anti-establishment, that are truly, in expressions of dissident thought. But he's just not consistent, and his administration's not consistent. So I don't see his administration as actually building up anything, any alternative institutions. Maybe I'm wrong. Something will come out of it. Maybe J.D. Vance will come over and start to consolidate some things. But he's just so chaotic. He himself, and then just the fact that he has such, he doesn't seem to have control over his own administration, and he does have these dissidents, but he has a lot of really establishment Republicans in powerful positions too. So you're not, the dissidents are doing something. I think they're doing. It's more destruction than creation, and that in general is true of Trump, and I think that's going to be his legacy. He has wounded the establishment, we'll put it that way, and I think he's accelerated its demise. It will fall, and I think because of Trump, it will fall sooner rather than later, and that's really, that's just, it's be careful what you wish for. You say, yeah, okay, this fall, but it could, what's going to follow that? Is that going to be chaos? Or could we have, I have to admit this is possible. You can have an ugly populist reaction. And you see some of that, I think, in the case of Trump. It's just like, okay, yeah, I'm so sick of the old liberal establishment. But it doesn't follow that truly the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You may end up have something, a force that comes in to counter them, and you cheer, and then you realize that these guys are crazy in their own way. And that's sort of what I wonder right now. I think it has to happen. I think, again, the old, I'm not going to stand by them. I'm not going to say a word on behalf of the old establishment, the globalist woke establishment. They need to fall. But it doesn't mean that whoever replaces them is going to be, the answer to all our problems. It's just, but that may be, whatever, like Trump and all his very many serious, flaws is, I'm not a believer in Trump, but I think he really is part of a process that's, again, let's say, facilitating, accelerating the downfall of the establishment. And that's something let's just say it's necessary. I fear it, I hope for it at the same time. But if we're going to have a new society, and once again have healthy institutions, and I think this establishment has to fall.
When we talk about institutions and establishing new institutions or healthy institutions, what are we talking about exactly? We're talking about universities, think tanks.
Yeah, all of those things. Yes, certainly education in general is very, very important.
So is that what we're focusing on?
But I would also say, just all these institutions that, those are among the institutions that shape culture, but certainly, the entertainment industry and all these things together, they do need to undergo some kind of transformation. They need to go under some kind of revolution. Well, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it has to. These are the people, these are the institutions that shape the way so many people think. I mean, you can, especially in this day and age, because of the internet, it's easier to break away and to find your own community and whatever. But it's still a challenge, and you would hope. I think it has increased the amount. It has made it easier to dissent, but still, most people don't dissent. I think that from talking to your old high school classmates, and I found that talking to my high school classmates. Again, very smart, accomplished people, but I was surprised by how much they are part of the establishment. I thought, like, didn't you just go on the internet and find all these dissident voices? And apparently not.
Yeah. Well, I was going to bring up the internet because you're talking about we need to fix these institutions or build new ones, and kind of the way that I look at it is that these institutions are antiquated. They're obsolete now. We don't need them. I mean, I think I think you're an example of that. Back in the day, you're wanting the academic career and having a title and the credentials. That's important. It's something that people strive for. But look at us. Look at you now. We've been doing the podcast for a year, and our channel is growing. And the reason is because they're not having that same appeal to expertise as the previous generation, where it's like, oh, if you didn't have that degree from Harvard, you didn't have that title of PhD, then I don't want to listen to you. But the fact of the matter is we just started having these conversations, and nobody knows who either of us are. You're just some, and especially if anybody looks at the earlier videos, you look like a caveman that is just saying things. But it was enough but people were like, hey, that what he's saying makes sense. And you don't need to have people are becoming aware that the experts are often compromised, and that is part of the problem. And so I think that we shouldn't even waste time about the institutions. We have all the tools here. If you're talking about media, movies, people can make things by themselves more and more easily now. You don't need to have these big Hollywood producers to get a great movie done or a great show done. And it's going to get easier, especially with the advent of AI video as well. So I'd say that the institutions, let them die, let them die on their own. They're just going to look stupid while they do it. And people are going to be moving forward. People will naturally gravitate towards reality. When people hear the truth, usually it resonates with people, and they say, yeah, these guys were feeding me lies. So maybe that's just the path forward. We don't even...
Yeah, well, I can't disagree with you. I think, at the present time, that's what we have. And now the establishment has noticed this, and they're quite upset about it. We've talked some about, especially in the case of Palestine, how this is ringing alarm bells. The ADL and other, Zionist organizations have pointed out, hey, we're losing the younger generation. And it's because of TikTok. It's because, in general, of social media, and we need to start controlling it. I listened to actually quite an extraordinary speech. I think it was by Norm Coleman. It was you heard that one. Okay, he's a Republican congressman. Anyway, he's an important figure in the Republican Party and connected with the Adelsons, now Miriam Adelson. So, very much in the Zionist camp. And he was saying that, hey, look, we're the masters of the universe. And he was actually talking about American Jews.
Yeah, he actually said, we're masters of the universe, right. Us, the Jews. He said it straight up.
And so he said, look, we got to clamp this down on this because this is hurting us. We got to shut this down and let people know the truth, which is, our officially sanctioned truth. They're getting away and they're getting these other ideas, and we have to stop it. But I think it's too late.
Just the fact that I saw that, I know millions of people saw that, and it's like more and more fuel to this. Okay, the idea that it was always this conspiracy theory that you never talk about. It's like, oh, the Jews control the media or whatever, and I don't like using that term because there's so many great Jews that are speaking out against what's happening in Gaza and just the Palestinian struggle in general. And it's Zionism is the term that I always want to use, but But it was just so open when he said that we're the masters of the universe, the Jews. It's
Yeah.
like, whoa, man, way to take that conspiracy theory and just put a rocket ship on it,
Right, right. Yeah, well, let's be frank, there is a great deal of truth to that conspiracy theory, so-called. It can be exaggerated and it can be, applied to unfairly and all those things, but there is a great deal of truth to it. And you'll hear from about that. Well, in fact, who was it? Well, it was Max Blumenthal that was talking about this. He's one example, some who doesn't pull any punches when talking about his fellow Jews. But another one is Glenn Greenwald.
Right, Glenn Greenwald's great.
Yeah, he's also just doesn't pull any punches. He's not afraid to point the finger at Jewish Zionists.
Jeffrey Sachs as well, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, again, but hats off to all these guys. Mm-hmm. These people they're not trying to cover up the Jewish role, but by doing that, it actually should let us all understand that this isn't just about Jews versus the rest of us. There are some Jews that are doing just wonderful work, and and are unconditionally opposing Zionism. And we just mentioned those three names, but there were many others.
Yeah, Norman Finkelstein, I think, was my intro to.
Yeah, and he's still out there doing. He hasn't retreated at all.
Mm. Okay, Dad. Well, is there anything else we want to say? I know we kind of just wandered around, but I found it interesting. It's just kind of an opportunity to learn more about you, actually.
Yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else that I wanted to say about? Well, yeah, I would say, I talked about how I didn't have really any concept of what it took to make your way in real life. But when I had you kids, then I got to make money. So it's not like money wasn't important. But then when I made enough money, I didn't worry about it. I said, okay, I can pay the mortgage and I'm okay. And I don't have any regrets. I could have made a lot more money in other jobs, I think, like being an accountant or being a doctor of some kind or whatever. But the good thing, especially in the later years, the first years, there was a lot of anxiety, again, as a translator, as a freelancer. But towards the end, I really enjoyed the freedom. I can live out here in the woods and I can quit at 3:00 and go for a long walk in the woods. I can take a nap in the middle of the day. It was nice. I couldn't imagine myself actually going back to a real job.